Top Shelf Radio, weekday afternoons from 3 on Triple J.
Ray, first question. It's 40 years, just over 40 years since the first album.
Yeah.
Has it gone quickly?
Yes, time flies when you're living life, you know. It's an odd thing, 1967, summer of night. Let's see, we released the first album January of 67, and Light My Fire was the number one song in America in the summer of love, 1967. July, somewhere in the middle of July. So coming up on Light My Fire's 40th anniversary, too.
When you were recording that debut album, not a huge number of people had heard of you at that stage. What did you feel like something special was going on in the studio?
Well, we felt something special from the get-go. The songs were really good. The music was good. All the players were in the band were good. And Morrison was, it was, the whole thing from the playing the Whiskey A Go-Go the year before. We had been 1966, the house band at the Whiskey A Go-Go.
Did you get sacked from there?
Yes.
What happened?
Well, Jim Morrison was on LSD and decided to expunge some of his demons and did the whole edible section for the first time.
Right, okay, which was the
Father, I want to kill you. Mother, I want to have
you.
Sexual intercourse and knowledge of you.
And what, that didn't go down too well in
No,
1966?
well, he didn't state it that way. It probably would have been okay if he'd have done the biblical, but instead he used the F word, the forbidden F word was used. And we were fired from the Whiskey A Go-Go, and it's kind of funny. The guy said, "You're fired. You're out of here. You'll never play the Whiskey A Go-Go again." It was like on a Thursday night, and Robbie fortunately said, Mario, the guy's name, he said, "Well, do you want us to play? Are we fired now, or do you want us to play Friday and Saturday? It's the weekend after all." And the guy said, "Oh, right. Well, you play Friday and Saturday night, and then you're fired." Okay, man, very good. You know.
So take us back to the. I know you've recounted this story a lot of times, but the first meeting that you had with Jim when you decided that you did want to make music together.
Well, we had graduated. We were friends at UCLA, and
studying film.
Yes, we were at the film school at UCLA, a college in California, and that's where I first met Jim. Now we graduate in May of 1965, and he said he was going off to New York City. I said, "Well, I'm going to stay in California," and I just got here after all, and I want to see what's going on in California, see if I can make a name for myself in film or something. And I thought I'd never see him again, but 6 weeks later, I'm sitting on the beach. My wife my girlfriend at the time, who is still my wife, and we were celebrating our 40th anniversary.
Is that right?
Too.
Congratulations.
Yes. 40 for the Doors and 40 for Manzarek and Fujikawa. And she was at work, the only one of us employed, and continued to stay employed while Jim and I worked on the songs. But anyway, Jim comes walking down the beach, and I see him, and I said, "My God, it's Jim Morrison. Hey, Jim, come over here, man. I thought you were going to New York." He said, "No, I decided to stay here." I said, "Well, cool, man. What are you up to?" And he said, "I'm writing songs." Oh, because I knew he was a poet. He knew I was a musician. So the fact of writing songs, sing me a song. And he said,
On the beach?
Right, yeah, we're sitting on the beach in Venice, California. It's 5 o'clock or so. Sun is starting to set, and it was a wonderful California day. Very much like an Australian day. I mean, the fact of being here is like being in California. The accent is different. Everything else is exactly the same. The water and the plants and the sun, and just absolutely incredible weather right now. Very much like California, very much like when Jim was on the beach. So he started to do Moonlight Drive, and when I heard those lyrics, "Let's swim to the moon, let's climb through the tide, penetrate the evening that the city sleeps to hide," I thought, ooh, dark and mysterious, man, very cool. And I could hear all the sort of Ray Charles, Jimmy Smith organ things I could do behind it. Then he had a couple of other songs, Summer's Almost Gone, a nice bolero. I could do Bach variations on that. A Latin bolero is a slow Latin beat. And My Eyes Have Seen You, which was a fast Latino rock and roll, Southern California after all, so that whole Latino influence is there. And I thought, these are great songs, man. Let's get a rock and roll band together. And he said, "Ray, that's exactly what I want to do." And bada boom, we did.
The Doors was formed.
That was it, right then and there. And I asked him, I said, what are we going to call the band, man? We can't call it Ray and Jim or two guys from Venice or something.
Might have been a very different story.
Right, exactly. Ray and Jim. And he said, no, the band is going to be called The Doors. And I said, The Doors? That's like the stupidest... Oh, wait a minute. You mean the doors in your mind, the doors of perception. Opening the doors. He said, you got it. I said, that's perfect, man. Psychedelic. With what I can do and those lyrics. And on top of it, I didn't tell him. I mean, but he was really a good-looking... He had become a very handsome man in the 6 to 8 weeks that I hadn't seen him.
Is that right? This is the next question for you. I mean, a lot of people who go on to become very charismatic figures actually start out when they're at high school or at university as not being particularly charismatic. There's a point where they find themselves. Was that the case with Jim?
Exactly. Went into the cocoon. He was staying at a friend's house, well, an apartment, a 4-story apartment. He was up on the rooftop, and he had gone into a cocoon there, and he had been reborn as Jim Morrison. James Douglas Morrison had just transformed himself from 160 pounds, 65, down to about 135 pounds, slim and lean, hard and tight. His hair had grown out, ringlets, jawbone. It was like, Jim, my God, wait a minute, you've become handsome. What the heck did you do to yourself, man? How did that happen? I didn't tell him any of this. I thought, that is so bizarre. And he had gone into a cocoon and had become reborn as a poet, rock star, and I mean, he always was a poet, but now he was a songwriting poet.
The Doors have had obviously an enormous impact on music and have had such an incredible following for so many years. But it's 40 years down the track since that first album. Are they still relevant in 2007?
Kids keep getting onto the Doors. I keep hearing of 14, 15-year-olds who are picking up on the Doors. People tell me, my daughter is 10, and she's starting to listen to the Doors. I've got a son who's 12 years old, and he's into the Doors. And, it's like each new generation begins to hit a certain point, and I think about 14, 15, you really begin to open your own doors of perception and look upon the Doors and the freedom that the Doors represent. And it just keeps on going, generation after generation. It's amazing. And now the sound of these new discs are just incredible, the very best of the Doors. They're completely new mixes. We took the original 4 tracks, 8 tracks, 16 tracks, and mixed them all over again.
And the tapes were okay?
Oh, the tapes, thank God. We baked, Bruce had to bake the tapes. Bruce Botnick, our original, very first engineer from the very first album. We're still working with him. Bruce had to do baking, it's called, and then you transfer it, and, so there were some technical things that had to be done. But
one thing which was about this new process of going back and remixing all the Doors music was the fact that you found out that the debut album, people for the last 40 years had been listening to it at the wrong speed.
And that on top of it, is that hysterical? Man, I feel so sorry for keyboard players who try to play Light My Fire in A flat. You can't play Light My Fire, and that's a half step down. It's in A minor. And
tell us a story about this, because
you'd have to ask Botnick. I can't figure it out for myself. Bruce, why? We played it in A minor. What happened to the machines? Somewhere down the line, a transfer took place, and it went a half step flat.
So what happened was the way I understand it is that the tape machine, on the way to it being pressed for the master, it just slowed down. And didn't anybody pick it up, though? Didn't you guys?
Well, I wasn't there, I mean, it sounds just fine. You listen to it and you wouldn't know. Because it's only a half step, just a little bit, just enough to make it impossible to play along with the original recordings. If you're playing in A minor, it's in A flat, forget it. It's like nobody caught that, and nobody caught it for years and years until people kept saying, you guys are playing it at that's in A minor, it's in A flat on the record. It was like, uh-oh, something must have happened, because it shouldn't be in A flat.
Maybe it's the little secret that worked right at the beginning for you.
Yeah,
right?
Who knows, man? It might have been just a cool tempo there, just slow it down, just a half step.
Look, you've had an incredible amount of experience in the music industry, and it's a strange beast, and I'm sure it's always been a strange beast. Yeah. But and people come to you for advice, no doubt. Over the 40 years of working in the midst of it, what are the things that you're really glad that you did learn, that you do pass on to other people?
Well, you better practice your instrument, that's for sure. You know, you can't just pick up a guitar and say, I'm going to be a rock and roll star. Well, wait a minute, you better be a musician first. I think what you've got to do is you've got to want to play music in your heart and in your soul and your fingers. Certainly for keyboard players, you better practice your instrument. You better learn your chord changes, your scales, and all of that. So you have to study, and Morrison studied his poetry. The first poem he wrote, he was 8 years old, so he'd been writing poetry since he was 8, and a very literate guy. So he practiced his instrument too, which was, poetry. The one thing he didn't practice was singing, and that happened at the London Fog on the Sunset Strip, and then onto the Whiskey A Go Go, where we became the house